Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Bulk. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint William Kidd, one of the legendary commanders from Blood and Plunder. So first colour we're going to use is Citadel Corn Red. I'm going to use this on the cuffs of his jacket. The material which is flown out from just behind him there, and also on his trousers. So this is Captain William Kidd. He's one of the legendary commanders from Blood and Plunder, which is a game which Adam and Dave got me into. It's a great little game. You have your own little crew of privateers, take on other ones, so you can have like the little ships, or you can have land battles. If you like pirates or anything like that, it's worth having a look, because it is a lot of fun. Next colour we're going to use is a little bit of Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm going to use this just to do the plume on his hat. I don't get a chance to paint many metal miniatures because there's so many of them in plastic now. So it makes a change. One of the things I realised when I was painting it was how easy sometimes you can scuff the paint off. So what I tended to do is when I'd done a few layers at the end of the night, rather than risk chipping it, now moved on to Citadel Mournfang Brown. Rather than risk chipping the paint, at the end of each night I gave it a spray of varnish, left that to dry just to protect it in the meantime between painting sessions, because I painted this over a few days. But it is one way to do it, is just give it a spray of varnish when you finish the layer, paint the next layer, give it a spray of varnish, and it does help protect the miniature. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Bain Blade Brown. I'm going to use this for the planks on the floor. So one of the reasons I'm doing some Blood and Plunder stuff at the moment is they've got a new Kickstarter starting the 6th of October for Raise the Black, which is set later than the original Blood and Plunder games. So I'm looking forward to having a look at that when that comes on. Once you've finished the Bain Blade Brown on all the leather straps as well, move on to the next colour, which is going to be Citadel Dryad Bark. Use to paint the handles on the pistols and the little bits which support the barrels. Now the miniature itself is really good. As I say, it's the first metal one I've painted for a while. But it's really smooth and it's got some cool details, like the little pistol strapped to his leg. He's got a sword in one hand, pistol in the other. Next up, we're just going to give his skin a bit of a colour with cadium flesh tone from Citadel. As I say, a lot of nice details and the different armies you can get. I've got the English starter army, Adam's got the French, Dave's got the Spanish. But a lot of good fun to be had with it anyway. Also it makes a change because this is painting more kind of traditional clothing rather than armour or different things like that, which is what I'd usually be painting. So it's quite fun to paint something different every now and again. So now I'm going to use a little bit of Vallejo white. I'm going to use this to paint his shirt. You can see that on the top of his open jacket there. And a little bit on his cuffs as well. Nice little focus on some of the miniatures in the background there. And there's some from Mantic, some from Studio McVeigh, some more Citadel stuff. Once you've finished the white, we can move on to the next colour. So next up we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Lead Belcher. I'm going to be using this to paint the blade of his sword and also the barrels of his pistols. You can see there that part of the paint was chipped off the sword, where I'd foolishly dropped it and bent the sword, bent it back into place, the paint flaked off. But give it a couple of decent coats of the Lead Belcher and you'll be fine with that. So moving on to vallejo ivory. I'm using that just to paint the leggings that he's wearing. Probably not the correct term for them, but you get the idea. That's because I wanted these to be a slightly off-white colour rather than being pure white and gleaming. I'm going to use a tiny little bit of Citadel retributive armour. I'm going to use this to paint the buttons on his jacket, the handguard on his sword, and also I painted a little bit like a buckle on one of his shoes. It's his left shoe. So painting it like that because I always think of nautical characters having big brass buckles on the front of the shoes. Now you saw me reattaching it after the blue tack that I was using to hold it down dropped him. Next up, we're going to start the shades using Citadel Reichland Flesh Shade. You can use this on his hands and his face. So a very quick layer this. I'll be painting up a few more Blood and Plunder miniatures for the blog in the next couple of weeks as well. I'm going to try and get the old Kickstarter miniatures finished before getting the new ones, but time will tell how that goes. With that shade finished, we're moving on to Citadel Seraphim Sepia. Going to use this on his stockings. So as I say, with the small challenge that me and Adam have got going on, painting some pike and shot miniatures as well. Kind of cut my work out for myself this month, but see how we go. Next up, it's going to be Citadel Carrowberg Crimson. I'm going to use this to paint the feather on the top of his head. Give that a decent coat of the Carrowberg Crimson just so that gets in all the little recesses. And we can move on to the next shade. After that, we're going to use Citadel Druchii Violet. I'm going to go over all of the corn red, so the sash around his waist, the red bits on his cuffs, and you've also got his trousers too. Give them a good coat of it so that you've got the darkness in the recesses. Now when we come back to highlight that, that'll keep them nicely shaded. Next up, it's Citadel Nuln Oil. I'm going to use this to paint the blade of his sword. Also going to use it on the barrels of his pistols too. Darken them down a bit so they're not quite shiny. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Snakebite Leather Contrast. I'm going to use this on all of the Bane Blade Brown for the leather straps. You're not going to use it on the planks. But for the straps you want to give a nice layer of this. What this kind of does is gives it that almost a mottled brown look. So that when you come to highlight it, you'll have different shades of brown on the leather as though part of it are worn and part of it is still crisp and new. Now it's Citadel Apothecary White Contrast. I'm going to use this on the white on his cuffs and also on the front of his shirt there, just beneath his neck. Just give the white a decent coat of this so you get the grey into all the recesses. That'll do some nice shading for you. So that's done. We're going to use a little bit of Citadel Agraxair shade. We're going to use this on all the gold. So you want to get that on the buttons, on the guard for his cutlass. And also you're going to use this on the Bane Blade Brown for the planks on the bottom there too. need to block off that little bit at the back there to stop it focusing automatically on them. Now we're going to use a little bit of vallejo black. I'm just going to touch up all of his clothes. So you've got his coat. You're going to work it between the buttons to make sure you don't get any of that, plus any areas that when you've undercoated you may have missed. So you've got a nice smooth black for his hat and his coat. Also his shoes too, we're doing them in black. So you can see he's got a slight shine here. That's because I sprayed slightly too much varnish on him on the first pass over. Now I'm going to use some Citadel retributive armour. I'm going to use this to reapply some of the gold back to him. So you want to avoid any of the recesses so that you still have the shade in there. And you just kind of paint the top layer to give it back its colour. Like so. Next up we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Liberator Gold and we're going to highlight the retributive armour. So thinking about where the light's coming in and where that's going to reflect. I'm going to try and give that a little bit of a highlight in those areas. When you're painting, if you happen to get any of the colours onto the black of his jacket, don't worry too much of it because you will be doing over the black and touching it up at a later point. So now we're going to use a little bit of Vallejo Model Air Chrome mixed in with some Liberator Gold just to give that one light highlight. This is mainly to do the edges, just to make them stand out a little bit on the gold. The Model Air Chrome has got loads of pigment in it. It's really thin, but it gives amazing coverage, so when you mix it with the Liberator Gold, it does lighten that quite a bit, but it makes it easy to work with because it's quite thin. Now I'm going to use Citadel Corn Red and we're going to start working on his sash, his trousers and his cuffs. So we're going to start reapplying the Corn Red, making sure you leave the Drucci Violet in the recesses. You think about where the light's going to catch them as well. You've got the top of the sash overhanging the bottom part, so you're not going to have as much colour and as much brightness in the bottom part as you are the top. I'm just going to reapply some of the colour to the trousers, again making sure that you leave the Drucci Violet in all the recesses when you're putting that back on. Once you've got all these parts done, we can move on to the next colour. Next colour is Citadel Wasdaka Red. I'm going to use this to highlight the Corn Red. So when you're putting this on, you want to apply it to maybe the top 50% of the Corn Red parts. You'll be having the light catch them and make those top parts stand out more than the underside. I tend to leave a lot of the underside of like legs and arms and stuff like that with just the shade on, or maybe a little bit of the base, just because it would be shaded, it would be darker, so I'll leave that as is. So we're going to add a tiny little bit of white to the Wasdaka Red. We're just going to do a highlight on all these parts. I've moved from using a Citadel medium layer brush to an Army Painter Wargamer character brush here. It's got a really good point on it. It's what I tend to use for a lot of my fine detail stuff. Once you've finished that highlight, you can move on to the next colour. I'm going to start working on the skin and we're going to return to Citadel Cadium Flesh Tone. So when you're applying this, you want to make sure that you've got some of that Reichland flesh shade in all the recesses. Try not to go over that. Think about where the ridges are in the hand, so you can see the tendons and stuff like that going down the back of the hand, the knuckles, between the fingers. And just make sure you try and keep some shade in those areas so that you can kind of see them and makes them stand out a little bit. Now we're going to add a little bit of white to the cadium flesh tone, and we're going to start with the first highlight on the skin. So always think about where the light's coming from. So it's going to be highlighting the top areas of the skin, the top of the cheeks, the top of the nose, like the bridge of the nose, the lip, the chin, that kind of thing. So it's the details like that that you want to pick out and make them stand out as though the light's catching them. You could probably leave it a little bit more shaded, to be honest, because he's got the brim of his hat overhanging his head, but it's nice to have the face stand out a little bit. So now I'm going to add a little bit of white to the previous mix and just do one final highlight. I've moved on to the Army Painter Wargamer character brush again just to do this final highlight because it's got a nice point on it. It just means you can pick out the details a little bit rather than using the slightly bigger point on the medium layer brush. Admittedly, the medium layer brush does have a very good point normally, but my one is slightly old. It's going to be getting replaced soon, but now I'm going to highlight the black with a little bit of vallejo German grey. So you want to make sure that you leave just the plain black in the recesses. The good thing about the vallejo colours is they are really, really matte, so if you're using the matte black and you're using the German grey to highlight these, it does really dull them down. You can see a little bit of a shine on the sash that's going around his waist and on some of his clothes as well. That's from where I've sprayed the varnish slightly too close to him. But once you give that a slightly further away blast, that should dull that right back down again. So to highlight the German grey, we're going to be using a little bit of Citadel Mechanica Standard Grey. This is mainly going to be to do the edges and the crests of some of the ridges in the material of his coat. And also on his shoes too, don't forget to do them. And also his hat. Now I'm going to use a little bit of vallejo white. I'm going to start doing his shirt. So you've got the cuffs on his sleeves here. You've also got the kind of cravatty bit down the front of his, down his front even. Slightly too far away, so that's focusing in the background. So zoom in there, you can just see me doing the front of the stuff here. So once you've done this highlight, you don't really need to do anything else with the white. I'm going to use a tiny little vallejo white here just to do his eyes. As always, this is the Army Painter Wargamer character brush. When you're painting the eyes, you want to go from side to side. So you're dragging that away from the nose, so you do have to rotate the figure a little bit. Just so you get that straight line of the eye. Now with that on, we're going to use a tiny spot of vallejo black. And you're just going to try and pop a little pupil in each eye there. Now if you do get the eyes in a place that you don't want them, don't worry too much. Just paint the white on again, try again. Now moving on to Citadel Mornfang Brown. I'm going to paint up his hair and also start working on the leather straps. You can see I'm just adding this to the edges of the leather straps. When you've put the snakebite leather on there, you can see that it has really given the straps and the belts and that kind of thing a kind of mottled look, which you'd expect from worn leather. So it does make it look like it's been slightly worn and chafed and scuffed already, So when you put on the Mournfang brown, you just mainly want to be doing that towards the edges, because we're going to do a little bit of scuffing on there. You use a little bit of Vallejo Flat Earth. It's one of the Flames of War paints, but you can get the equivalents. And we're going to use this on his hair. The reason I'm using this on his hair is just to add a different coloured highlight so it doesn't stand out as much on the straps and things as well, so it doesn't blend into them. So ignore this paint, we are not using Flat Earth again, we're actually adding a little bit of Citadel Rakarth Flesh to the Flat Earth. I'm just going to highlight his hair with that. You don't need to do too much with his hair. Just make sure you catch all the bits so it stands out that little bit more with this highlight. Then we can move on to the next colour. So now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Mournfang Brown, and then we're going to add some Citadel Rakarth Flesh to it. And with this mix, we're going to start highlighting the edges of the belt again. As I said before, we're just doing a little rough edging, so it's the scuffs on the edges of the belt. So you're not doing it in a straight line, you want to do it up and down motions on the brush, so that you're getting the edges as though you were going to draw a line from one side of the strap to the other, but just doing little tiny bits. That'll mean that you've got those scuffs on the edges and it looks a bit more rough and a bit ragged rather than having a straight line of the lighter colour. Now we're going to add a little bit more Citadel Rakarth Flesh to the previous mix. I'm just going to highlight that once more, doing slightly less this time, but mainly on the areas that you want to have those extra level of scuffs on. So now I'm going to start on his legs. We're going to reapply some Vallejo Ivory. I want to think again where the light's going to catch it, so the top of his calves, sort of any lumps and bumps around his knees, bit down the front of his shin, and sort of like the lower back of his leg as well. But you want to make sure you're leaving quite a bit of the Seraphim Sepia there. If need be, you can maybe thin out a little bit of the paint if you want to, just to lighten up some areas of the Seraphim Sepia, or as the paint's quite thin anyway, you can generally kind of feather that in gently and just lighten up any shade which is a bit too dark. So with that done, we're now just going to use a little bit of Vallejo White and give the stockings a little bit of a highlight. Next up, it's going to be Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm going to start working on the plume of his hat. Now, because this is going to be quite a kind of big, fluffy, feathery thing going on, you can pick out any of the details that you can see. If you can't see any of them, because it's like the sort of like the fluffy kind of feather, so it'd be all over the place in real life, you can just add little lines and little bits of colour where you want them to be. It's a really good thing with the plume. So we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Evil Sun Scarlet to highlight that. You'll see as I start adding on the lines, you can get a lot of the ones around the edges because you've got those details on there, but where it's more the sort of like the fluffy feathery mass in the middle, you can just pick out lines on that and just put your own on there. That'll look fine once it's all painted up. And for the final highlight on the plume, we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Squig Orange. If you watched any of the other videos, you'll probably recognise the colour of this plume is based on the way that I do Blood Angel's armour. Okay, now working back on the planks, I'm going to use Citadel Baneblade Brown. We're just going to reapply the colour to these planks. Now with wood and stuff like that, you always want to paint along the grain, so you're going to be doing it lengthways. You don't want any side-to-side painting because that will fill in any of the gaps and make it look a lot more flat. Whereas if you do it lengthways, you can keep the shade in the ridges, or in the recesses rather, to make those details stand out. That done, we're going to add a little bit of Citadel Xandri dust to the Bain Blade Brown. I'm going to do a highlight with this. Now the reason I add Xandri dust to it is because it does turn it into that kind of light wood colour. When you've applied the next highlight too. Once you've finished going over these and highlighting the planks, it's on to the next colour. So I'm going to add another little bit of Citadel Xandri dust to the Bain Blade Brown mix that we've just used. I'm just going to add that layer on, just highlighting certain patches of the floorboards, or the deck rather, I should say. Next up, I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Reichland Flesh Shade. I'm just going to go around some of the edges of these planks just to make them stand out a little bit more. Now it does have a slight tint of kind of red with the Reichland Flesh Shade, but I think it is quite good for putting on the details because it kind of blends in, but at the same time makes the actual outlines of the plank stand out that little bit more, so that you can see how the deck's put together. I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Agraxair Shade. I'm just going to reapply that to some of the recesses and around some of the other edges where you haven't put the Reichland Flesh Shade, just to darken them up, give them a deep brown colour. And around the edges of each of the planks we're going to do a little bit of this as well. Now I'm going to use a little tiny bit of Citadel Lead Belcher. I'm going to highlight the barrels of his pistols and also the blade of his cutlass. When you're doing this, you don't want it to be 100% smooth. It must be ever so slightly mottled. So you've got the lead belcher on there, but you've also got some of the shade to sort of dull it down and give it a little bit of detail. You're also going to paint the bolts on the deck as well that are holding the planks down. Now I'm going to use a tiny little bit of Vallejo Model Air Chrome. I'm just going to put a few little edges onto the sword, and then we're going to do a few little diagonal lines on the blade itself to make it look like it's caught under the blade and it's maybe scuffed it or chipped it. And finally, we're going to use a little tiny bit of Citadel Agraxair Shade. I'm just going to put a little blob of this on each of the bolts holding the planks in place, just to give them a slightly weathered look, so they're not quite as bright and shiny. Like so. And that is the finished William Kidd miniature. As I say, it's the first lead one I've painted in a while, and it's the first pirate one I've painted in ages, and it's really good fun to paint and makes a change from the usual stuff. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel and enjoy the content and you'd like to support us, feel free to buy us a brew at our coffee page linked below. Thanks very much.